So Carl, tell us about the new Position Point series.
So the Position Point series is about, I guess, growing up and my interest in DIY underground and culture and punk music in particular, and also obviously my interest in reductive and conceptual based painting, really. So I mean, out of that, I'm interested in this idea of simultaneity, which is about the idea of when two oppositional things that are never supposed to come together are brought together, they create a new relationship. But if you look at the idea of my starting point in punk, is that I used to do fanzines, which were about my favourite bands, or just bands within the Sydney community, I guess you could say. And I used to do interviews with bands, and they're Xeroxed, so they're just black and white, cheap Xeroxed, stapled in the middle booklets, really. But anyway, if you think of punk music and you think of DIY music, the idea of that is that it's about immediacy, and it is about the idea of the most direct way you can create music to express what it is you want to express. Well, if you think of those rules and you think of my art, it is the same thing. It's a few elements that come together to express what it is I'm wanting to express. So out of that, I mean, I've always been interested in architecture and the idea of how space is both built and collapsed. So I'm really interested in this idea of how through shards of colour you can create space but also fracture space at the same time. And then if you think about the images, when we think of an image, we say to ourselves, well, it's reality. So an image isn't real because it is fictitious in the sense that it is just a document of something that's real, but its image is not real because it can't be that person. However, the actual materiality of the photo is real. And so I know it sounds convoluted, but the idea there is how do we think about what we're looking at? And so, for example, by using these Xeroxed images, and I'll explain what they are in a second, but if by using these Xeroxed images, I don't use them because they're representational, because they're not representational. They're actually a document, as in their documentation, because they're all of people on stage performing, which is actually the reality, and the photo that I appropriate is documenting the performance. It's not a photograph. And so because of that logic and the idea of confusing the logic, when you look at the painting, do you see the black and white image first, and it's the colours or fractals or shards of colour, whatever words you want to use for it, are they abstracting the image, or is it the image that's disrupting the pattern? And so you get this interplay between push and pull of the two things that come out of it. And then the names, well, position point is like a point of position. And to take a position means you have to be against other positions, because you can't be for them if you've taken a position. And so that actually relates to the music, because you don't choose to do punk and you don't choose to do DIY because you're not very good. You choose it because it's a conceptual decision, because you want that immediacy, you want that kind of, I guess you could say, that force of disruption to be present. And so that's a huge part of the work, because then when you think about the visual nature of the work, that's inherent in it. And then the names of the pieces are position point and then in brackets a sentence or a word. Well, all those things are songs of that particular band. And that's the secret of that is that you can actually, the information's all there to start to unload or decipher in a kind of cryptic way who the person is. And all the people I choose are just, they're really autobiographical for me. They're people I really like. So it's kind of like being a teenage girl who likes One Direction, having posters on her wall. Except I put them on canvases.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
And does it relate to your band, your interest in music?
Very much so. I mean, I used to play in punk bands, and I used to do all that sort of stuff. And but as you get older, no one wants to see a 40-year-old in a punk band. I don't care who you are.
Does that style of music relate to your songwriting for the Suicide Swans?
Yeah, no, in all seriousness, there's still bands going around who are in their 40s and 50s who I love, so I make a joke about that. But in terms of myself, yeah, very much so. Like, it's interesting for me because there's like some people in Australia or the world who think I don't make art anymore, I just do music. And then there's other people who are the opposite. They think I make art, but they don't know I make music. I'm really interested in the disruption being in the connection between the paintings and the use of the Xeroxed information. And obviously now, after what I explained, why I use Xerox in the paintings? Fanzines. So they relate back to the idea that a fanzine being a quick way to have an engagement with culture that you design because you're the person designing it. But it's also about expression, and it's also about the idea of conceptual intention. So, yeah, so to get back to the end, everything I do is based in the idea of presenting things where I try to reduce all the elements down, so what's left is the most core thing that we can then deal with, because then when you're dealing with it, you obviously go out because people have different ideas. So in the newer work, I'm now starting to collage the images more. So now I'm kind of disrupting the actual image that I'm Xeroxing, that I'm using, and then it's getting disrupted again when it gets painted over and things like that. And that disruption also occurs within the actual painting, because sometimes you can still see the Xerox coming through the paint. So that's another layer to it. And so, yeah, look, it's just about the kind of idea of putting together these sort of layers that are constantly evolving visually.